A delicious chocolate bundt cake that in and of itself is incredible and becomes next level when topped with a yummy salted caramel sauce.
Whoa, Sally. Woo. That girl in the kitchen. Whoa, Sally. Woo. That girl in the kitchen. Whoa, Sally. Woo. That girl in the kitchen. Whoa, Sally.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Sally That Girl in the Kitchen. In today's episode, I'm going to teach you how to make a chocolate bundt cake with salted caramel sauce. Yes, a delicious, moist chocolate bundt cake that comes out of the pan super easily, will not stick, and is topped with a delicious salted caramel sauce. And the inspiration for today's recipe is the fact that I made this particular cake with my youngest son many years ago when he was younger. And it was a project we did together. And he still talks about it and mentions it every once in a while. And so, since it is going to be his birthday very soon, a couple of days from now, I thought it would be a really nice treat and a nice surprise for him to make this cake that is somewhat nostalgic to him. And of course, absolutely delicious. So, I am super excited to teach you how to make it. So let's not wait another second and let's get started. For the chocolate bundt cake part of today's recipe, you will need unsalted butter for greasing the pan, which should be at room temperature. You're going to need about 2 or 3 tablespoons. 1 3/4 cups plus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. 2 cups of sugar. 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking powder. 1 1/2 teaspoons of baking soda. 1 teaspoon of salt, 3/4 of a cup of unsweetened cocoa powder, plus some more for dusting the pan. 2 large eggs, which should be at room temperature. 1 cup of buttermilk, also at room temperature. 1/2 cup of vegetable oil or any neutral oil. You can use avocado, whatever your favorite neutral oil is, would work just fine. 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract, and 1 cup of really hot water. And for the salted caramel sauce part of today's recipe, you will need 1 cup of sugar, 6 tablespoons of unsalted butter, which needs to be at room temperature, and you will be cutting it into cubes, 1/2 cup of heavy cream, also at room temperature, 1 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, and 3/4 of a teaspoon of fine sea salt. You can also replace that for some flaky sea salt instead, but I like the fine sea salt running throughout the salted caramel sauce. You will also need a bundt pan, which is 10 inches in diameter, in other words, the standard size bundt pan, an offset spatula and a round tip knife, a whisk, a silicone spoon or spatula, a serving fork, a bamboo skewer or a toothpick, and you'll need a large bowl, a medium bowl, about 3 wet measuring cups, some dry measuring cups, and some measuring spoons. You will also need a medium-sized non-stick pot, some oven mitts, a cooling rack, and if you choose for the salted caramel sauce to drip off the sides of your cake and you don't want it pooling on your cake board or your plate, then I suggest a pan underneath your cooling rack, but I don't mind the pooling. So that choice is up to you, whether you want a clean plate underneath or you want the caramel to pool. I will note that if you allow the caramel to pool on your plate or your cake board and you refrigerate, if you have any leftovers, that caramel will become hard. So it's up to you whether you want to let it drip off or you want the extra caramel. Of course, if you bring the cake back to room temperature, the caramel will soften. So just keep that in mind. So now that we have all of our ingredients and tools together, let's get started. So the first thing you're going to want to do is preheat your oven to 350 degrees, making sure you have a rack placed in the center. Then we're going to prepare our bundt pan. So I'm going to be using the same type of unsalted butter that I'm using in the cake. And what I like to do is I just open the stick of butter. Remember, this is at room temperature, and I like to use my hands. You can use gloves if you prefer, but I wash my hands and I use my hands. So I'm just gonna pinch off some of that unsalted butter, and I'm gonna use about 2 to 3 tablespoons in total, because the idea is you wanna grease this pan really well. You wanna get all the nooks and crannies all the way around. And then instead of dusting with flour, which we do traditionally for a lot of cakes, this is what it looks like once it's completely greased, like super well greased up. Then we're going to dust this with cocoa powder instead. So you'll see that I just pinched off about 2, 3, half of it would be 4. So I'm calling this 2 to 3 tablespoons. And it's very well greased, because this, in combination with the unsweetened cocoa powder, is going to help our cake release perfectly and not stick. I'm using this particular bundt pan because this is the same bundt pan that I used many years ago when I made this cake with my son. So definitely next level nostalgic. So this is what it'll look like once we've dusted it, and we avoid white flour on a dark chocolate cake. That way we don't run the risk of having that powdery white finish on our beautiful cake. So I dusted off the excess cocoa powder over my sink, and now it's ready to go. So now you're gonna grab a large bowl, and you're gonna add 1 3/4 cup plus 2 tablespoons of all-purpose flour. Then you'll add 2 cups of sugar, 1½ teaspoons of baking powder, 1½ teaspoons of baking soda, and a teaspoon of salt. Then you'll add 3/4 of a cup of unsweetened cocoa powder, and you're gonna mix it all together really well with a whisk. You just wanna incorporate all of the ingredients, and you're gonna end up with like a light brown powder. Just make sure that everything is well incorporated and you don't see any white spots or white clumps. So once that's well mixed in a medium-sized bowl, you're going to add 2 room temperature eggs, and you're going to beat those well. I'm using a serving fork, or as I like to call it, my trusty fork. But you can use a whisk, a fork, whatever works for you. So into that, you're going to add your 1 cup of room temperature buttermilk. Make sure you get all that yummy goodness in. Then you're going to add a 1/2 cup of your oil and 2 teaspoons of pure vanilla extract. And then you're going to mix that well to combine. Just make sure you give it all a really nice mix. It's going to look slightly curdled, but that's perfectly normal because, of course, you're mixing liquids in with oil. So just mix it up until it looks pretty much like this. And then you're going to bring it over. You're going to pour it all in to your dry mixture. Just make sure you get all of that in. And then go ahead and use your whisk and just bring the ingredients together. You just want to make sure to scrape off the sides of your bowl and combine the wet and dry ingredients. So it's going to be like a thick mixture at this point. Make sure to break up any clumps. And then what you're going to do is you are going to transform it. So you're going to heat up 1 cup of water really hot. If you're not comfortable with the microwave, you can use a tea kettle, but you want this really hot. And then you're going to pour that in, and you're going to see that what once was a thick batter is going to become a runny batter. And it's funny because some people see this runny batter and they worry that their cake is not going to set. But on the contrary, this is going to create a super rich but moist chocolate cake. I absolutely love this chocolate cake recipe. I've made other videos using this base chocolate cake recipe. It's my glitter tsunami cake, but I've modified it with a little more flour to make it in a bundt pan so that it comes out absolutely beautiful. So speaking of bundt pans, you're going to bring over the pan that we prepared earlier, and then you're going to pour this entire mixture in. And you're going to see it's going to fill up about 3/4 of the way, which is exactly what you want because you want to give your cake a chance to rise. It's going to need some space to grow as it bakes in the oven. So just make sure
You pour this all around and of course scrape off anything that's clinging onto the bowl. As I always say, you want to get every last drop of the yummy goodness. So once you've gotten all of that in, then this beauty is ready to be baked. It's going to be beautiful. You place it on a center rack of your oven and you set a 65-minute timer. You can check it at 60 to see if a toothpick comes out dry, but in my oven, 65 is the magic number. So after 65 minutes, I brought it out and I'm going to grab a bamboo skewer. You can use a toothpick instead. And you just want to insert it towards the center of the cake and make sure it comes out clean. You can have a few crumbs maybe, but not wet. So it's perfect. So now you have to set a 15-minute timer because you don't want to wait any longer than that. You want to wait about 10 to 15 minutes before you do this step, which is to use your offset spatula or a round tip knife, and you want to go gently all around those crevices, just very gently so you don't break the edges of the cake, and make sure you release the cake all the way around. And I'm going to go in with my round tip knife in the center tube because it's just thinner, smaller, easier to work with. You want to make sure that the cake is released all the way around. So remember, I waited 15 minutes. You don't want to do that right out of the oven. So I'm using a cake board. You can use a plate, or as I said, you can flip this right on the cooling rack if you want your caramel dripping off. But I'm going to keep that caramel on my board. So I'm going to flip my cake, and I can feel already it's perfect. It's completely loose. There it is. It's absolutely gorgeous. And by using that cocoa powder, you see how we don't have any of that white powder that you would get if you would have used flour and greased the pan. Instead, greasing it and using the unsweetened cocoa powder, we maintain that gorgeous dark brown, absolutely chocolatey, gorgeous color. It's beautiful and it's shining because it's a delicious, perfectly moist cake. So now as the cake continues to cool, I'm going to cut off 6 tablespoons of an unsalted butter stick. And we can put the other 2 tablespoons away. We're not going to be using those. And then I'm going to cube this butter because I'm going to be adding it into my caramel, but I need it ready in small cubes for when it's time. And then into a medium-sized pot, I'm going to add 1 cup of sugar, and I'm going to turn the heat on to medium. So sugar burns quickly. You're not going to want to walk away. This caramel comes together really quickly. You need to stay by your stove. So I spread it out. Just make sure that all the bottom of the pot is covered with sugar. And very quickly, you're going to see the sugar will appear to seize up as it starts to melt, and then slowly will start melting. So you'll notice first the outer edges gently just starting to bubble ever so slightly. And then you're going to use your silicone spoon or spatula and you're going to start stirring. And as I said a moment ago, you're going to see just these clumps start to form. The sugar is starting to seize up, and that's perfectly normal. It will seize up before it starts to really melt, but this goes pretty quickly. Do not walk away from the stove. So you just continue to stir, and you see what I mean? You have like crystal pieces running throughout these chunks, but it's starting to melt around those chunks and it's starting to develop that golden color. So once you get to this amber color and all of those chunks of sugar have melted, notice I have not stepped away. This happens really quickly. You're going to want to add all of those cubes all in at once, and then you're going to see how quickly it starts to melt and it will bubble up. So do not worry, but just be careful because of course sugar burns. And then you're going to be using your silicone spatula or spoon, and then you're just going to stir this continuously until it stops foaming. So you see how it's formed almost a foam, but I am not stopping. I'm just stirring, stirring, stirring until the foam is going to settle down. That's what you're looking for. And notice this color is absolutely gorgeous. It doesn't stick to the sides of the pan, and it smells crazy good. So now it's no longer foaming violently, it's calmed down. And now we're going to start adding in our heavy cream. So it's important that everything be at room temperature, and it will bubble up once again pretty violently. So that's where we go in very little at a time. And as we're pouring it in, we are stirring. So this is a two-hand deal. You have to pour with one and then continue to stir with the other. And we're just pouring it in a little drizzle at a time. And again, it became foamy, but we're just going to stir, stir, stir. And it's becoming silky smooth in front of our very eyes. You're just going to continue to stir it, and it just takes a matter of moments, and then all that foaminess is going to just completely disappear, and it's going to become a silky and absolutely delicious caramel sauce, which of course we are going to add some salt to. So now I've turned off the heat. I took it off the heat, and now I'm going to continue to stir for just a moment, because now it's achieved that texture and color that we are looking for. And now I'm just breaking up the bubbles because it's no longer on the heat. And now I'm going to add in 1 teaspoon of pure vanilla extract, and I'm just going to gently stir that in. And it's still bubbling, but the heat is off. It's just bubbling because I added that room temperature vanilla into this hot mixture. And I'm just going to continue to stir, break up those bubbles. And now I'm going to add 3/4 of a teaspoon of fine sea salt. So if you're using a flaky salt like Maldon salt, you're going to want to go for about a teaspoon or a teaspoon and an eighth. You're going to need a little bit more because that salt is less dense because of its flaky nature, so you need a touch more. But I'm using fine sea salt because I like the way it just dissolves in the caramel. And look at how gorgeous this is looking. So I've let this sit for about 10 to 15 minutes because what we want is for the caramel to cool down when we're ready to pour it over the cake that has already cool down to room temperature. So it's important that we let it sit for 10 to 15 minutes. We want it pourable. We don't want it hot, but of course we don't want it to seize up completely. So if it does seize up, you can always turn the heat on and stir it until it becomes loose once again. But then of course you'd have to wait another 10-15 minutes because we want it pretty much pourable, but not piping hot. So then once we get our delicious salted caramel sauce to the right temperature, then we're just going to use our silicone spoon or spatula, and we're going to drizzle it right over the top. Now remember, I'm working on a cake board. If you don't want the caramel to harden when you refrigerate this cake, do this over a cooling rack so the excess drips off, because the stuff on the cake itself is not going to harden. It's going to become more of a glaze, but the excess stuff that's falling, or stuff, I should say, salted caramel, that's falling onto either the plate or the cake board, that will get hard as it sits. But as I said, if you bring it back to room temperature out of the fridge, if you have any leftovers, let the cake sit out at room temperature and that will soften up once again. But it will harden when cold in the refrigerator. So I'm using all of the caramel, and look at this effect. It's almost like this drippy, almost candle wax looking effect, which I absolutely love, which is why I like to do this on a plate or a cake board, because I just love the pooling at the bottom. But as I said, that's a personal choice. You can do it on a cooling rack. It's also going to look absolutely gorgeous. And if you want a cleaner finish, then definitely go that route. But let's take a look at how gorgeous the pooling in the center is. Because of course, if you're doing this on a cooling rack, you're not gonna get all that caramel in the center either. So I like to do it this way, but that's a personal choice. So enough with the admiring. Now it's time to cut myself a slice. Yeah, I'm being conservative. I'm going with a small piece, but wow, the texture, I can feel it already just by slicing into it. It is perfection. This cake, look at how dark and gorgeous it is. This is the perfect chocolate cake recipe. Whatever you top it with, this cake is divine. And that salted caramel sauce, so crazy good. I actually left a little piece of cake behind. You know, that first piece is always the hardest one to pull out. So yeah, that belongs to this slice. So I'm not leaving that behind. Look at how beautiful with the caramel sauce on the outside. It is perfection. It's not overly sweet. The cake remained moist, and that caramel, with that touch of salt in it, is just the perfect complement to the delicious cake. This is a perfect bite with caramel and plenty of chocolate. It's so good. It's funny, I don't know why, it almost reminds me of a Twix bar. I know there's no cookie, but it's got that like chewy caramel and chocolate together, and Twix is one of my favorite. Not sponsored. Maybe I'll make a Twix cake and they'll sponsor my video. But I'm telling you, this, crazy, crazy good. Perfect, perfectly balanced. And look at the sides. Let me show you what that caramel, you see, it's still kind of chewy and just perfection. Which is why I say room temperature is the way you want to go. So good.
So how crazy good does this chocolate bundt cake with salted caramel sauce look? It is absolutely divine. It came right out of that pan with no struggle at all. And we didn't have any white powder since we used the cocoa powder. And of course, that caramel sauce on top. Whether you want it pooled around your cake or you want to let it drip off, either way, it is divine. And of course, you can even make the cake and then just serve the sauce nice and warm on the side for people to pour onto their own slice. There are so many different ways that you can serve this cake. Of course, you can add colored sprinkles if you're serving it to children, or a little extra flaky salt if you want to kick up that little saltiness. It's just delicious, and the possibilities are endless. Trust me. No, better yet, don't trust me. You're going to have to try to make this delicious chocolate bundt cake with salted caramel sauce yourself. And of course, if you enjoyed today's recipe, don't forget to like it, write me a sweet comment, share it with your friends, send it to yourself so that you have it and can refer back to it when you're looking to make a delicious cake. And it's easy and the results are phenomenal. And of course, if you're not already subscribed here on YouTube, stop what you're doing, go over, subscribe, touch that little notification bell so that you get notified every time I put out a new delicious recipe, which I'm doing all of the time. And of course, go over and explore. Check out my playlists. I have tons of recipes out already, hundreds of recipes, sweet, savory, everything in between. There's lots of good stuff there for you to explore, so definitely check those out. And of course, if you're not following me on social media, you can find me as Sally That Girl in the Kitchen on Facebook, Instagram, and on Pinterest. And you can find me as Sally That Girl FL on X, Snapchat, and on TikTok. And of course, you'll find me on Threads, and I have an Amazon shop, but all of that is always pinned to the banner of my YouTube channel, and of course, pinned to the top of the Sally That Girl in the Kitchen Facebook and Instagram pages and my TikTok page. So if you want to find any tool or anything I've used, an ingredient that's a bit unusual, anything that I may have used in my videos, you'll usually find it in my shop. And of course, if you want to find me so that you can follow me all across the internet, all of my pages will be pinned there. So once again, I just want to thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Whoa, Sally, woo, that girl in the kitchen. Whoa, Sally, woo, that girl in the kitchen. Whoa, Sally, woo, that girl in the kitchen. Whoa, Sally.